The example that we were talking about earlier that came to my mind was the sort of the counterexample, the how bad can it get if you're not agile, right? If you're not organizationally adapting, is the U.S. government military product development process. So for developing a new aircraft carrier, a new plane, or a satellite or something like that, is legendarily expensive and slow and has 19 levels of subcontractors to it. So actually, I read a report about this a couple years ago. I was involved in a product development consulting project where about 30 years ago, the government was concerned that the products were delayed and they were getting very expensive, and they would get to the end and they would find out that they wouldn't work. It's like, all right, so they looked at the industry and said, we're going to introduce a stage gate process where we're going to check pretty early on if we've got everything going reasonably well before we give you any more money. So we won't just keep throwing money at you for 5 or 10 years. You've got a couple of years worth of, getting to the prototype stage, and then you have to pass all of these requirements. You have to pass this gate before you can go to the next stage. So they did that. So fast forward a couple of decades, and what does that turn into? Well, the stage gate process itself is now a cottage industry, right? Where it takes a year and a half just to make the documents to be able to pass the stage gate, even once your aircraft carrier or plane or whatever is ready to be evaluated. And now you're spending millions and millions of dollars on creating documents for this report, and it's added more and more time, and you're getting farther and farther behind. And what's happening now is that the technology that you started with is becoming increasingly obsolete, right? You made decisions, you passed your stage gate 6 years ago, 2 gates ago, but you can't even buy those parts anymore, right? Because that's not the current technology, and it just gets worse and worse, right? So investing in agility is the only way to stay on top of this, kind of constant change. And it doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean that big organizations will naturally just thrive in this new world. But that sense of like, oh, we're going to lock in the process and avoid messing up is 100% guaranteed to become out of date very quickly, is 100% guaranteed to close off opportunities to make something better.
Yeah, and that's generally the type of solution that the current system proposes. This is what we have to be very, very careful of. And this is where top leaders do have the responsibility in terms of when your organization is making a shift. We have to let's go back to what we said before on, hey, we need to identify the pieces of our current self that are not compatible with this vision of our future self. So the current system, how many times have you seen this, Brian? You have an issue, it hits the customer or whatever, it hits the metrics, and somebody gets tasked with making a countermeasure. And of course, what type of countermeasure does a white blood cell try to create? It tries to create a countermeasure to force everything back into the current system when the current system was what created that defect in the first place. So all you end up doing is creating layers of process on top of layers of process and forgetting what your organizational purpose and your mission actually was. Now, like you said, the mission is to get past the stage gate. But why do we have to get past the stage gate? What value does it provide for us to get past the stage gate? We have to constantly ask ourselves things like that. What value does this provide? Is this who we want to be as an organization? If we don't second guess ourselves constantly on those sort of things, are we actually adhering to our mission? Then it's very easy to take that higher purpose that you had initially, your first goal, and your primary goal, and accidentally drift away and replace it with something like, oh, our goal is to get through these 23 stage gates.
Yeah, and so we got one of these. We actually got the explicit analogy for this in this movie, right? At one of their summit meetings, when Carol has to talk Henry Ford into continuing the race team, right? He uses hey, look out at these factories. These used to build B-29 bombers or something in World War II. I want you to go to war. Now, realistically speaking, no human should ever want to actually go to war. Like, this is a terrible idea. But as an analogy of like, make the goal the most important thing, right? And subordinate everything else to that. For a race team or anything else, yeah, if your job is to build bombers, then the goal is not to pass the stage gates. The goal is to have, the goal is to have defense technology, is to be able to have things that will fly around in the air.
And the goal really is to protect your humans, right? To give your humans a good life to live.
Get the war over with as quickly as possible, or however you want to phrase it. That organizational clarity is really important.